Hey, good morning. It's Sunday morning, May 5th, 4th. I'm not sure. Uh, but it's raining outside. It's been cloudy. And the rain has just caused the trees and the flowers to burst. And I'll take you out there in a little bit. But I was thinking, just for some reason, it occurred to me. I was reminded of a couple of incidences that really surprised me, and just wanted to share them with you and talk about, you know, what we might learn from them. They both involved people that I worked with, who I had invited over to my house for something or other, for maybe dinner. One was for dinner, and the other one was we were on our way. We were going to climb Mount Washington up in New Hampshire, and I'm in Massachusetts, and he lived in Connecticut. And so he drove up to my house, and we kind of used this as a staging area, and we drove up to Mount Washington the next morning. And it struck me, the first thing, I mean, he'd seen pictures of my house, and I'd seen pictures of my garden. He's seen my TikTok stuff. But he had recently remarried, and to a woman who was doing real well in her own business, and they bought a big fancy house up on a hill in Connecticut and got new cars and all sorts of stuff. Excuse me, a new boat, and came over here, and um, I live simply and by choice, and came over here, and he pulled into the driveway, got out of the car, and first thing he says, "This place isn't so great." And I let it pass. But now contrast that to another friend who is still living in Finland, and he lives outside of Helsinki. And in Finland, it's a European country, and if you've never traveled to Europe, you don't know. Their standard of living is much lower than ours. And if you own your own home, you are, like in the top 10%. If you own your own apartment, you're in the top 20%, maybe. So, and I invited this fellow. He was here in the States traveling with me on business, and I invited him over here for dinner one night, and he pulled into the driveway. Now, I had my Ford Explorer with 200,000 miles on it, a 2003, and I had a Honda Accord that also had 200, near almost 200,000 miles on it, and little rust spots here and there. And he pulled into my driveway, and he looks around, and he says, he looks at the garden, he looks at the house. He says, "You own this whole place?" And I says, "Yeah, this is, and this is my home." And he says, "You have two cars?" And I says, "Well, yeah, most everybody does around here. We're out in the country." And so he was just flabbergasted. He came inside, simply furnished simply, and nothing fancy. And he was just flabbergasted at the standard of living here in the United States. So I keep thinking of those two people, and how the one fellow who had all sorts of, what he considered, he drove a Audi, and a big fancy home on a hill and everything. And it was just him and his wife, and they had like 15 rooms in this place. And and he thought it was necessary to sort of comment negatively on what I had. Yet the fellow from Europe uh, was astounded by what I had. And it just, I find myself thinking, like I said, I find myself thinking about that a lot, and how your attitude and you know the things that are important to you, how much those two things shape your view of life and shape and determine who you are. Now, if you're a Christian and you find yourself identifying with my friend from Connecticut who is a Christian, you may say, you may wonder, where, is Christ important in his life, or are these things more important? And Christ said a number of things, in when he was here on earth, and before he rose, it was before he was crucified, and then rose into heaven, and he died for our sins. Well, during the time he was here, he said a lot of things about, what you need to do, what you should be doing if you're a Christian, if you're a follower of our Christ, if you believe in God and are a follower of Christ. I mean, he says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. When was the last time you saw a movie where something happened to somebody and the guy spent the rest of the movie loving the person that hurt him? No. The movies that we watch, something happens to some guy and he spends the rest of his life and the movie chasing down the person to get back at him and do something negative to him. And then Jesus says, feed the hungry, show hospitality to strangers, right? Care for the sick, visit those in prison. This fellow from Connecticut, where is he in this? Supposedly a Christian, is he spending his money to feed the hungry? Is he volunteering on weekends to show hospitality to strangers and visit those in prison? If he is, he's not. He didn't tell me about it, and I doubt very much he's doing that. But and then the big thing that Jesus said was, don't lay up treasures for yourself on earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. You cannot serve God and money. Now, the fellow that from Finland, who thought that I was super wealthy because of all that I had, he was comparing me to his lifestyle in Finland. He and his wife, they've been married for 10 years. They have one child, and they just managed to buy the apartment that they were living in. And he has one tiny little car that's just big enough for the three of them. And he comes over here, and he sees what I have, and he immediately thinks that, I don't know exactly what he thought, but he was envious of me. And yet Jesus is saying, don't lay up treasures for yourself on earth, right? But work to get, but work to lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And how do you do that? Well, you feed the hungry, you show hospitality to strangers, you care for the sick, you visit those in prison, and you love your enemies. All right, make disciples of all nations. That's what he says. Share the gospel with your friends and other people you know. And then he says, once you've done all that, love your neighbor the way you love yourself. Okay, and I must confess, I fall short on every one of these. But we seek perfection, knowing that we may never reach it on this earth. So anyways, hold on and I'll take you outside. All right, here we are outside. God bless you. And running out of time, but things are really blooming. Those are lilies back there, and this is the onion patch right here. And I planted squash right here. Flowers are blooming everywhere. Look at this, huh? Pretty cool. Irises